All right, welcome back to Real Talk, where we don't do scripts, we don't do
All
fluff,
right, all right, all
and we
right.
definitely don't do perfect.
Hey, and this is what would you do? Real scenarios, real consequences, and real opinions from people actually in the trenches.
Today's scenario hits hard. Buyers getting cold feet after going under contract. Inspections are done, nothing major, but fear has entered the chat.
And this isn't about legal advice or who's right. This is experience based, opinions driven, and open for respectful disagreement.
Because how you handle moments like this can define your reputation, your relationships, and sometimes your entire business.
So let's get into it, right? So here's the scenario on what would you do. So I'm representing a buyer who went under contract 10 days ago. Inspection came back mostly clean, nothing catastrophic, mostly cosmetics. Then the rates jump up slightly, right? The buyer starts doom scrolling, and now they say, "Hey, I don't feel good about this anymore." You know, I think we rush into this one, and I want out. So there's no clear contractor out without risking earnest money. The seller, on the other end, has already gone on the contract on their next home. The buyer asks you, "What would you do if this were your money?" You know, so this is the scenario. Like, this is interesting, Heather, because you and I spoke yesterday. I was in a similar situation, not exactly the same scenario, but man, it happens. This happens, to all of us. What's your first instinct on this situation, Heather? What comes to mind?
Well, a lot of questions actually. And first, before we get into it, want to make the disclaimer that this is a made up scenario that does not have anything to do with anybody in real life. So any resemblance of that is purely coincidental. Getting that out of the way, let me just say the first thing that comes to my mind is there's so many things that are attached to this deal. Like you've got the buyer, or I'm sorry, yes, let's start with the buyer. You've got the buyer's earnest money, right? And then that's on the
Yep.
line now. You've got on the listing side, you've got the sellers who are already under contract on another home. So that's also hanging in the balance, right? And then you've also got that other agent who is also expecting commission off of this deal to get paid. And obviously you want to be paid too, but as an agent, for me, first and foremost, what comes first is my client and their best interest. And I don't want them to be unhappy at the closing table, right? I definitely don't want them to feel like they were forced into doing something they don't want to do. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And we're just going to have to jump in and kind of unpack it one step at a time.
It is. It's certainly a lot because, like you said, you don't want them to be in a position where they are getting buyer's remorse and be like, "Okay, I got into this house, I committed to this. I'm really not happy." That's a tough situation to be in, you know. But like I said, there's a lot to be unpacked, and first and foremost, I think you got to sit down and have a conversation with them, and
Mm-hmm.
and and, and really navigate the details as to what got them into the house in particular in the first place. You know, what is what is making them get cold feet about it? And start from there and see unlocking different doors to get you answers to things that maybe they were not open at the beginning. Uh, because there's a reason why they wanted to put an offer in there, you know, and at the same time, what is causing them that cold feet? Like, let's bring it back a little bit. That's kind of what I would do. Let's bring it back and see exactly what's going on here because maybe what they think it's cold feet is not necessarily anything bad after all. So we really have to dive deeper into that discovery now before we make any sudden movement that we eventually regret again.
Exactly. The worst thing to do in this situation is, I think, the agent respond out of emotion and the agent start panicking and then have everybody else panicking because they're panicking. And I guess my question for the agent in this scenario is, did they thoroughly explain the due diligence period and earnest money? And does the client understand that they will lose that earnest money if they, pull out or be sued? So there's so many consequences that can happen. And was all that explained to them way back when you signed that original BBA, buyer brokerage agreement? And then, like you said too, about, having that conversation with them. We talk a lot on the show about real estate agents also having to be therapists to their clients and getting to the root cause of the anxiety and the cold feet. So how would you go about having that conversation with the buyers that are suddenly like cold feet wanting to pull out?
I want to highlight two things you mentioned there. One is going through the whole process, the contract, right? The different steps along the way. It's so important to dive into that at the beginning, right? Because when you're making an offer, you want to know exactly what's going on every step of the way. What happens after the offer? What happens after the offer is accepted? Every step of the way, you want to go over that with your buyers because that's also part of your negotiation tools, right? You want to understand and put an offer out there that's going to benefit your client, but at the end of the day, in negotiation, it's about finding a common ground, something that works for both parties. As far as the other question, how would I approach that with the buyer? It's really going back and saying, so tell me more about why you're getting cold feet. What's happening? Um, you know, and really diving into the specific of, okay, I feel like the house doesn't have anything to do. Maybe it's the location. Maybe, what about the property or that transaction them is giving them cold feet? And then identifying that and seeing also why did we decide to make an offer in the first place? Well, what about the property that they really like? You know, and okay, does that overtake you know, the concerns that they have? Did we look at other properties that address both of those areas before we put an offer on this one? And what was the outcome of those searches? What was the thought process between on those property that we saw that address those points that they are concerned now? Because if we saw other property that addressed what they're getting cold feet now, and they realize that those didn't make sense, maybe they just need to put that into perspective again and say, okay, oh yeah, that's exactly why we put an offer in this house. That other property, I did not like the way that looked, this or that, the location, something about those property that did not align with everything that they wanted to, that they were willing to move forward with this one. So it's really, going back and doing that discovery and allow them to see for themselves that when they made the decision to put an offer on this property, it was the right, uh, you know, decision for them if that's the case. And then still, at the same time, identifying any other areas that they may have to cancel the contract. But before we get to the point, it's really identifying, why they decided to move forward with this one in the first place.
And when you're doing this, when you're going through the discovery with them to try to figure out what it was that made them fall in love with the property or at least like it enough to want to put in an offer on it, um, are you going at this from the angle of trying to save the deal, or are you going at this from the angle of trying to protect the relationship you have with the client? Because those are two totally different things.
I'm a relationship first guy, always. That's the way I approach it. Yes, there's some deals that if it doesn't make sense for the buyer or they don't want to move forward, at some point you got to put them in front of them and say, hey, this is what happens, and these are the consequences. If everything's in place, there's no running away from that, right? So I always try to approach it from a relationship first. That's a long term friend that I'm building here that I have compared to a transaction. And then on the back end, we'll find ways to recuperate the loss for a particular transaction, or add value somewhere other areas aside from the monetary. So that will be me. I always approach it on a relationship based first, and I think that's always been the way I operate uh, outside of real estate and everywhere. So, how about yourself?
Same. No, I think it's more important to look at the relationship. If you're looking at each transaction as like a deal or a file or a closing instead of a person or family that you're trying to get into their forever home or whatever home it may be for them, then you're not making those personal connections. You're not really building something that is sustainable for a future referral business from that person and then from the person that they referred. If you're just looking at as this transaction, I know a lot of agents who are very pushy, just shove people into homes and would just sit here and basically kind of like bully or threaten or scare them into continuing with a deal that they don't want to do. So there's, I think, a difference between advocating and advising aggressively for your client. Because at the end of the day, you do have to do what they want you to do. It's not about what you want, it's about
Yep.
what they want.
Yeah. Just to give you a quick example, I was introduced to this buyer from a third party company as a referral, right? Corporate. I've talked to them a number of times over the past. I got introduced to them back in August of last year. Got introduced to them, talked to him a number of times, showed him some values, some areas of things to pay attention. Stay in communication with him at least once a month. And over the past, at the end of the year, he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna dive into 2026 and start looking for a property." And he's like, "I've been looking at some properties, but I keep getting agents calling me about, using them." And I tell them, "Hey, I'm already working with an agent." And I had no signed a buyer's agreement with them. Yeah, we just talked over the phone several times. And at the beginning of the year, I went and met him in person to see a house. First time I met him in person, and the company that he reached out, I knew one of the agents there, and they're like, "Oh, I know Andres." Uh, so mind you, great, connected great. A week after that, we saw some additional homes. Um, and in the process of looking at the properties, he was like, "Man, this is where we're gonna come in and play dominoes. This is where you're gonna come to the parties. We're gonna play some dominoes here. We're gonna cook a lechon there. This is gonna be big. I'm excited to get into this property." And that relationship that we built over the past few months, and I just met him once at the beginning of the year, and then started going to some properties, signed the buyer's agreement on the contract already. But for me, that's what it's all about.
Oh, you froze, Andres. The last thing we heard was for you, that's all about what it's all about.
Friends. I'm gonna just gathering with the family. So I look like I lost my signal there. Did you catch
You,
everything?
you did for a second. The last thing we heard was
You
you said
lost me for a little bit.
what it's all about. Yeah. The last thing we heard was you say that's what for me that's what it's all about. And then we lost you.
So yeah, for me, it's all about that. Connecting with these clients, building these relationships, and as we go through the process of identifying the right home, and seeing the excitement, making the plans and what they're gonna do with the parties, and man, a lot of they include me in those parties. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm down. I'll be here." So it's lovely. I enjoy that. I appreciate seeing the clients like that and just being able to be part of that moment for them. For me, I couldn't ask for anything better.
No, I love the way you build relationships with people. I think you do a great job of building that trust, that foundation of trust with people. and that shows in your business, whether it's cloud or whether it's real estate. I think people know that you genuinely care about them and you care about their future, whether that's doing business as an agent or whether that's getting into the perfect home for them. It looks like we have somebody trying to join us as a pop-up guest. I think we're having a little bit of connection issues today. I'm trying to let them in so that they can weigh in on what would you do. Oh, and we lost them. Did you see them try to hop in?
Yeah, I did. Hey, that'll be great. If anyone's out there listening and want to be part of this, don't forget to, go through our websites, fill the form, and join us on What Would You Do or Am I the Asshole podcast. So let's go.
Yes, because we'd love to get your take on what you would do, or if you've had a similar.
So going back to those questions, Heather. No, I haven't had a similar scenario. My scenario is it's a little bit different. Um, but it's one of those things that where, like I mentioned, we revisit what was important for the property. Like a situation where they had other properties in mind during the search, but they were not willing to compromise on some of the things that the property has. And we moved forward with with the property originally intended. Inspection came back. There's a lot of little cosmetic things in there that at some point they were questioning. Okay, are we really going to move forward with all of these things, or should we try to get the other one? The other property was no longer available, but after revisiting and renegotiating those terms, everybody was happy with the deal moving forward and you know, uh, getting this done because the things that they thought would be a concern were things that could easily be addressed, taken care of, and it overtook the concern of, okay, getting into another property. There's nothing else in the market similar to this with everything that we wanted. It's either we stop the search until something else comes up in these areas for that price range. I think there was so much more at risk than just renegotiating the terms and getting the details addressed, and that's something that needs to be looked at, right? You don't want to make a rush decision into okay, let's cancel the deal, and next thing you know, there's nothing in the market, especially if you're on a leash. You already give your 30-day, your 60-day notice. Now you put yourself in a much tighter, difficult situation moving forward. And not only would that affect you, but that would affect negotiation as well and the terms.
Really well. One thing I know, a lot of our job is managing fear and managing doubt. There's one thing that I always talk to my buyers about, especially when they're getting cold feet, is if they walk away from this, are they going to regret it? So I play a game of make believe with my clients, and I've had to do this several times. And I tell them, I say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to picture two different scenarios. One is you have closing day and you move into the house, you decorate it, you put your furniture in, and think about how you're feeling as you're doing that. And here's the other scenario I want you to picture. I want you to picture that we terminate the deal. Somebody else goes to closing day, closes, signs, gets the keys, goes into the house, and they're decorating it. I want you to picture them. It's not you, it's somebody else. They're decorating it. And now they're going to live in that house. If you're completely okay after you picture somebody else closing on the house that you wanted, moving into that house, decorating that house, having birthday parties, babies, grandkids, living their lives, dogs, all of that with that house, and it doesn't bother you and you're fine, then we know that terminating is going to be okay. But if you imagine that and it's like, oh no, but that's my house and I can't, that makes me so sad, then maybe we need to pause a minute and really think about this before we just terminate it. I would say 99.9% of the time, after they picture the two different scenarios, they're like, yeah, That's our house. That's the house we need to move into. And it's all about putting things into perspective for them. No, I'm not saying if they say I'm fine with somebody else moving into it, it doesn't bother me, and you know that they really did honestly do the two different scenarios, don't push them into a house they don't want.
No, definitely. And that's something that I truly believe in walking into a house and the house being like, okay, this is my place, you know? This is where I want to be. Like you said, imagining a scenario. And something I got from a symposium not too long ago is the house can tell your story. You know, as a seller, if you're representing the seller, you can tell a story of their life through the house
Yeah.
and everything they experienced that. And at the same time, you can show a buyer what your life could be in that house. It could tell your story, and I think it's so important to look at it in that perspective where you can see all the things that you're doing, your kids, the bonfires, everything that's happening in the house through a video, through images, and really make you feel like, okay, this is the right place for us, you know, or not, right? And you certainly need to have that that clarity before you move forward with any property, because at the end of the day, it's your everyday home, right? You want to come back and be, man, this is it, you know. Um, just I was presented an offer, just to give you another scenario. I was presented an offer over the past month or so to move into a newer property, and I love the idea. I love, of going to a new property. Uh, but I sat down with my wife and we looked back and we're like, you know, we haven't done it. We haven't done everything that we wanted to our house yet. There's no reason for us to move. Like what we envision doing to this property, there's so much things that we want to do to make it ours, to make it so unique in the potential. Like let's not, we can't move forward without getting this done.
Yeah.
There's a story to tell in this property, and we haven't told it yet. Let's make this happen before we make any move. Because when we first saw it, we envisioned doing all of this, and we haven't done that yet. So let's see it through before we make a decision. And that really made the decision for us. Like just really sitting down into why we got into the house in the first place. Allow us to see things that we were overlooking by simply, oh, it's a great opportunity. It's a newer house. Let's make that happen. On the immediate aspect of things, we were looking, okay, it's a great house. Let's jump right in. But when we really sit back and ground ourselves, it's the important things that got us into this property that really hold us down to it. Because that means a lot more than just getting into a better opportunity. And sometimes it's those little details that we want to rush into making a decision that we think it makes sense or it's the best opportunity, but when you really sit down and ground yourself and think about it and dive deep, then you find the answer you're looking for.
I think you're absolutely correct, and I think a rush decision on anything is never a great decision. It doesn't have to necessarily be tied to real estate. It could just be tied to any walk in life. A rushed decision without fully thinking things through, without fully understanding the ramifications of the choice you're going to make, is never a good thing. Especially though when it comes to money on the line, contracts on the line. If you are an agent and you find yourself in this situation, the advice that I personally would give to you is explain to your client, after you walk through the emotional side of it, explain to them the legal side of it. And if you're a newer agent, or even if you're a seasoned agent and you're just not quite sure, talk to your broker, talk to the closing attorney, find out exactly, have the closing attorney talk to the the buyer. Sometimes the best advice you can give a buyer is, I think you should talk to a real estate attorney about this particular thing, because you're not an attorney and you're not a lender. You shouldn't be giving lending advice and you shouldn't be giving legal advice, but you do need to let them know what the ramifications could be. That way they are prepared. I'm not saying use the legal side of it to like beat them into submission, into moving forward with the offer. But if you also don't tell them what could be a ramification of terminating this deal, and then that comes to pass, they're going to be like, what the hell? I didn't know this was going to happen. You didn't. I thought I would just lose like $2,000. I didn't know all of this stuff was going to happen. So it's very important that you know what they need to know and tell them what they need to know.
Oh, absolutely. You have to, especially you go so far into the contract. You also got to think. I know we're right now going to the buyer scenarios, but think about the other side of that picture. If you put yourself in those shoes, they're also going through a lot. How long they had the house on the market? How long they were looking to move into the next property? You're not. It's not all about you at this point. And that's how I like to look at things. You get into a situation at some point. It's no longer about me. It's about everybody involved in this transaction. Yes, it's your property. Yes, it's your dream home, but that seller, that property, you're impacting their life as well. So look at all the details that pertain to that decision you're making right now. Um, and like you said, make sure that you are verifying with the real estate attorney to make sure that we're in compliance and everyone's interest is protected. Because if you go in just thinking about me and I need my money back, I want to cancel this, you probably are affecting a lot more than just your deposit.
Yeah.
So and that's something that needs to be pay attention to.
And it definitely sucks to have that conversation with the other agent. I don't want to go into too many details, but I've been in this almost exact, so very similar situation. And it was after due diligence period. I had to call the listing agent and I did the scenarios. We told them the legalities. I don't want to go into their reasoning, but their reasoning was their reasoning and they did not want to move forward. And it was after due diligence period. The other people, the other side, the sellers had a house under contract. So they needed this one to close. They were trying to line up the closing dates and the moving dates and everything. The other agent was a really good agent, seemed like an awesome agent to be working with. There wasn't any issues there. Not that I'm saying if they're a bad agent, it makes it any better to do this, but it was just a really good relationship, working relationship we had, because, sometimes you can have a difficult relationship with the other agent. And it was a very hard phone call because I knew it was going to not only screw up this deal, but it was also going to screw up her other deal as well. And it was a very hard phone call to make. And that's the shitty side of real estate sometimes, is having to pick up that phone and make that hard phone call.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up a good point. Is that other relationship with agents, right? I think, and I just mentioned yesterday, I saw a post where I feel we take it personal, right? In some situation where they take it personal, and I understand we also have we also have to make a living, right? We put a lot of work into. We say this a number of times. We put a lot of work in the on the back end, right, to ensure deal go as smoothly as possible. And that goes on both sides. And I understand things happen. We have to, we have a family to take care of. We have to put food on the table. I understand all of that from an agent perspective. Uh, but I think sometimes the agents take the transaction itself a little bit too personal, right? Maybe just me because I'm a relationship first guy. I want to make sure that I have a friend, a family member that I'm representing, and I have a good friend across the table on the agents, right? If I Not always do we get the opportunity to talk and see with the seller or the buyer on the other side, but we are always in communication with the agents, and I want to make sure that I always have a friend on the other side of the table. Like when we close a deal, I have a friend I can call back and say, "Hey, man, that was a great, great transaction. We went back and forth. We worked out things accordingly." Uh, but I see consistently posts about agents not saying great things about the opposite table, right? Or complaining that a certain commission didn't go their way, and and I think there's a line where you have to leave the person out, and you're working in the best interest for the people that you're representing, and and that takes having a great relationship with the other agent to find that common ground and leaving all the personal. Hey, if you talk to the agent, turns out you don't like them, okay, leave that aside. Don't bring that into the table, you know.
Yeah,
And, and sometimes at least I see people putting that on public more often than they should.
I
I
definitely see a
just
lot of people venting more often than they should, especially on Facebook and Facebook groups. It seems like they're all just venting Facebook groups, but I
seriously,
wouldn't necessarily say that when I'm working a transaction, I'm trying to be like great friends or best friends with the agent on the other side. But I will say that I'm trying to have a professional relationship with them, and then after the transaction is over, if a friendship could occur, then that's awesome. But there's been times where it has been a very tense
yeah,
for no reason situation, because the other side is gets the a lot of agents and a lot of homeowners take the amendment to address concerns very like emotionally to heart. For those of you listening who don't know what that is, during your due diligence period, you go through, at least here in Georgia, we have something which is called the Amendment to Address Concerns, which the acronym is ATTACK, which I think is actually kind of hilarious because that's basically what it is. It's an attack on what's wrong with the house. Um, and it's your job as the agent to go through, find everything that's wrong with the house, and then you decide what you want to ask for from the other side. Like, are they going to fix this? Are they going to give you concessions for this? Like, what's going to happen? And there's a lot of sellers that personally feel like violated that you would even mention something was wrong with their house. And then in the same sense, you have a lot of agents that get really upset about it too as well. And I'm like, I'm just doing my job. Like, you knew this was going to happen. It wasn't a surprise. So it's just for me about obviously advocating for my client first, making sure that they're getting what they need while also trying to have a professional relationship with that other agent. And if it can grow into a friendship, great. Because I obviously would love to work with somebody on like a referral basis, especially if they're in a different location than me. But if not, I don't know.
yeah, it's not always going to happen, but that's how I approach it. Is it's not always going to happen, but I do my best to make sure we're in good terms at all times. And but like I said, some people take it their own way when they know it's a standard process in the transaction. So it's just preparation.
Yeah.
If you prepare both the buyer and the seller before you start the process, then we always say, handling objections before they come. And it's one of those things, the house is going to get an inspection, things are going to come up. Why do you feel like you're being attacked? So it's just a matter of putting it on the table ahead of time so they know what's going to happen. When they come, they're not as surprised as they usually are, but yet they still are in some cases, right? So in the nature of the business. But man, this half hour today, man, it went through. I know we just started with this way of format of what would you do and my idea. So we love to see more people join us here on the table and get your point of view. And we also want to bring up different scenarios where if you are a lender, if you are an inspector, you know, agents, we want to bring these different points of view because this is what it's all about. A transaction, there's so many parties involved in a transaction that we love to share the different points of view from those angles on different scenarios so that we can provide some great insight into the people that are actually looking to buy or sell real estate and they have an opportunity to listen to what we're doing here and learn through the different scenarios, because although these are scenarios we are creating, it may happen. You never know. It may happen, and we want to give you some insights into the people that are involved in the trenches. So it's a great stuff.
It is. And that's why we do the show, right? Because there's not one perfect answer for every situation, but there are better conversations that we can have. So before we jump out, let's recap. And what would you do, Andres, in this situation?
Man, I think what I would do is, like I said from the beginning, is really sit down with the buyer in this case and and determine what they're getting cold feet into the transaction. You know, and there's a reason why we looked at this property and decided to move forward with this property. And then if there's a reason that we didn't address before that is surfacing now, then it gives us the opportunity to dive into that before we make a decision, right? And then really at that point determine what will be the best course of action, you know? And if that is canceling the contract because they no longer feel this property is going to fulfill their needs in the future, they're not happy, then also highlighting, you know, what will happen in that case because everything is already disclosed and we talked about it before we submitted the offer. So
Yep.
it's really sitting down and discovering what the true cause of what they're getting cold feet and then making a decision there. I would not rush into making a decision because it could backfire on either one of them and and go from there. And what would you do for that?
Basically the same thing. I would, like we talked about earlier, I would walk them through the emotional aspect of it, walk them through the inspection, the contract, things like that, and then walk them through the legal side of it, explain to them the ramifications of terminating the deal, and then tell them since we're already past the due diligence period, one day isn't going to really make a difference. So sleep on it, and then let's make a decision in the morning, and whatever their decision is what we'll do. That way they know that I'm not pushing them one direction or the other. I'm just giving them advice and then also explain to them that that's what I'm doing and tell them, look, at the end of the day, I'm going to do what you want me to do, but it is my job to inform you of everything you need to know. So I'm just going to lay it out for you, sleep on it, and let me know in the morning. And since, like I said, due diligence is over, it's not like we're on a time crunch right here. So whatever they choose to do in the morning is what I would end up doing. And that's what I would do in this situation.
Absolutely. Nice, nice. So, man, this has been great, and I'm excited to continue to put this out there. So, here's the thing: it's our job isn't just to save deals at all costs; it's to help the clients make a decision that they can live with, right? So, if you're a buyer, what would you want your agent to do for you in that moment? You know,
Exactly. And if today's scenario made you a little bit uncomfortable, well, that's good because that's where growth happens. And that's what these scenarios are all about. And I think we lost Andres. He froze. But anyways, guys, if you want to be part of our future What Would You Do roundtable, or if you want to be on Am I the Asshole, don't forget to scan the QR code at the top. That way you can join us live and weigh in, giving your opinions. Also, don't forget to go to our website, like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss an episode. And we will see you guys on the next one.
I think I lost you there.